Hello, my name is Ekaterina. I'm glad to see you on my channel. And today we're learning how to sew. I'll tell you something very simple, namely, what clothes are made from. There are only 4 types of materials used to make clothing. These are fabrics, knitwear, leather, and fur. So fabrics are essentially weaving itself. It's one of humanity's oldest inventions. It is several thousand years old. And here's how weaving was done. For example, by the ancient Egyptians and their predecessors, even earlier civilizations. Basically, we do it exactly the same way now. It's just that the process is automated now. So the principle of weaving, the long warp threads are stretched out tightly. However many threads a person has in length, that's how many are used. And that's how long the piece of fabric will eventually end up being, the one that's being woven. And there are crosswise threads, also known as weft threads. And these crosswise threads, in the simplest version, it's a single crosswise thread, meaning a single weft thread, which creates a plain weave. With an offset in a checkerboard pattern, the weft thread interlaces with the warp thread, then the thread turns around and goes back in the opposite direction. This creates a kind of simple checkerboard mesh pattern. This type of weaving is very easy to observe, for example, on a piece of burlap fabric where the individual threads are thick and coarse. Or, for another instance, simply take a screw or a small piece of medical gauze and look closely at it. You will clearly see this basic plain weave. It truly is the most ancient and fundamental invention of humankind. Then the process became more complex. There can be more than one weft thread. There can be 2, 3, even 4. They can alternate. When working with each other, they can be of many different vibrant colors, various unique textures, and they can create a wide array of intricate weaving patterns. But the fundamental basic principle remains exactly the same as it was many, many centuries ago. Next, knitted fabrics. These items are knitted, and in fact, they are made using the exact same fundamental principles as traditional hand knitting. When you think of hand knitting with needles, those of you who already know how to knit can easily picture this process in your mind. And those who don't can, for example, watch their relatives doing it at home or simply look up something like The Art of Knitting on YouTube. There you can see exactly how the needles interlace the threads to create a beautiful finished knitted fabric. In general, the art of knitting began with primitive hunters who would tie snares and traps, weave nets, and make fishing nets using basic materials to survive in their environments. They also knitted chainmail to protect themselves in battle. But that was no longer ancient people, that was already closer to civilization. So the principle of knitting was known to humanity, and quietly, knitting stayed firmly in the distant background. The primary material used for making clothes was fabric, and knitting was secondary. It primarily existed in the form of stockings, socks, and blankets. And somewhere starting from the 19th century, that's when knitting, or rather knitwear, began to actively integrate itself into the daily lives of people. Why did this happen? Because the industrial knitting machine was successfully developed, which could knit much faster than any single person. And knitted fabric could be produced faster than woven fabric. And when did the century arrive? The 20th century, the age of automation. Plus, it's the era when humanity, let's say, not only took off the corset, but also began to think in a completely different way. Knitted fabrics became increasingly acceptable, not only for the production of underwear, but also for everyday clothing that could be worn in various public settings. And there are certain categories, for example, homeware, sportswear. There you won't find anything made from woven fabric at all. Well, I suppose except for, a few specific jackets, but almost everything else you see here is knitwear. And the process of producing knitted fabric is significantly more easily automated. And the process of making clothing from knitwear is much simpler than making clothing from woven fabric. So get ready for the fact that there will be more and more knitwear. That's just how the market works for everyone. The cheaper the production, the more profitable it is for the manufacturer. It's more profitable for the store, so they'll be training us to buy all of this. Laughter. Fur and leather are even more straightforward. Humanity has been using these materials since the most ancient prehistoric times. Well, how did primitive man live? Whoever they caught, they ate. And from what was left after they ate someone, the skin remained. That is exactly what they wore back then. And it was during that specific era that humanity invented their very first tools. So it wasn't just some simple spear or arrow, but also intricate needles and thimbles, with which, in the most primitive way possible, they carefully stitched these pieces together. Leather and fur, so that they would stay on a person, not fall off, and keep the person warm. In the contemporary world, in addition to traditional natural leather and fur, we also use various artificial leather and faux fur. These materials fundamentally are made of either fabric or knitwear. So, if you find that the artificial leather is quite dense and doesn't stretch, then it is most likely that the base of this artificial leather is fabric, that is, a woven material onto which various polymer films have been applied. Well, you can read about polymers in a chemistry textbook. Familiar names like polyvinyl and polyvinyl chloride, for example. These materials are frequently utilized in the manufacturing process to produce artificial leather. So if you find that artificial leather stretches, then it is most likely that the underlying foundation of the material is a knitted fabric, specifically because knitted material has the natural property of being highly stretchable. Furthermore, specialized polymer films are also applied to this base, but their specific characteristics must be such that they adhere firmly to the surface. The knitted base layer. And they also need to have the property of stretching and staying firmly attached to this base. Artificial fur is also knitted fabric. That is, in the process of creating knitted fabric, various types of threads of different compositions and thicknesses are used. For example, two threads or perhaps just one thread form the foundational base on which the fur will later be held. And then one or even two additional threads are usually used for this. Now, this kind of looped fabric is somewhat similar to like a terry towel. If you look, there are little loops there. Fur is made according to the same principle. First, a looped fabric like this is created. Then these loops are carefully cut and trimmed, and the material is combed out so that the loops become soft and fluff up. As a result, the finished fur can end up looking just like real animal fur of a real living creature. So they carefully trim the material and dye the fibers so that it can pass for the fur of a fox or a lamb, for example. And there is fur that is intentionally dyed pink or green. Yes, I am artificial, that's just how I am. And that's exactly what makes me special. Leather and fur can be either natural or artificial, and the same goes for fabric and knitwear. They can also be natural or artificial. What does that depend on? If the threads from which the fabric was woven, or if the threads used to knit the fabric are of natural origin, then accordingly, the fabric or knitwear will also be natural. What counts as natural? Cotton, linen, wool, and even silk. Moreover, you can have a fabric or knitwear that is entirely natural and organic in composition. For example, a full 100% made from one natural material, such as 100% cotton or 100% linen. Or natural fibers can also be blended together to create a yarn that consists, for example, of wool and cotton, or cotton and linen, or cotton and silk. There are even blends like silk with wool. In other words, humanity is inventive. In this regard, depending on the proportions and types of fibers blended, the thickness of the yarn, and the weaving method used, we end up with different fabrics. They differ in their density and intended use, and accordingly. Knitwear also comes in various densities for a wide range of purposes. Fabrics and knitted materials can be entirely synthetic, meaning they are manufactured from petroleum-based products. These include the well-known materials like polyester, polyamide, acrylic, nylon, spandex, and capron. These are the main materials that, for example, if you go shopping for clothes and check the composition on the label, you will frequently come across these names. And essentially all of them, well, what are they? Oilcloth. Well, of course, oilcloth isn't as strong, These are much stronger, but the essence is the same. They are thin strips of very, very strong oilcloth, which are either woven or knitted into something. They are strong, they are cheap, they are easy to dye, but they don't breathe. They don't let air through. That is their major and primary disadvantage. As for the extensive environmental damage caused by man-made synthetic textile fibers and from various sources, from synthetic fabrics and knits and natural fabrics and knits, here's how it is. The chemical industry, yes, it operates, it pollutes, and produces many useful things for us. Yes, they require hundreds of years to decompose, but they can be recycled, almost entirely without any loss. So recycled materials, yes, that's good. They can be processed again. But when it comes to natural materials, let's put it this way. Raising animals and growing cotton and flax on such a scale still requires fertilizers, still requires animal feed, and it's still an industrial process. And the production, especially of cotton, requires a huge amount of water. It's incomparably more than what's needed to produce synthetic materials. Therefore, if, for example, you get into an argument about which is better, both options pollute the environment in their own way. It's not that I'm some kind of eco-activist. I just firmly believe that practicing moderation in everything we do is a much better approach. Accordingly, if you invest in something natural and of good quality, it can certainly last you much longer. So, you actually contribute to the preservation of nature if you choose to buy not 10 cheap t-shirts, but just one really good one. If you instead buy 10 polyester t-shirts or various tops just for the sake of looking different every day, that also doesn't really cause much harm to nature. You're not creating a problem as long as, of course, all that polyester is guaranteed to be recycled afterwards. And as always, the balanced middle ground is the best possible option, especially when high-quality natural fibers are combined. When these are combined with synthetics, specifically in proportions where the natural fibers predominate, you get materials that, in terms of their physical properties, tactile feel, overall composition, density, and simply, as people often say, are pleasant and soft to the touch. So all of those original qualities are preserved, but adding just a little bit of synthetic fiber makes these materials more durable and resilient and much longer lasting over time. It also resists wrinkling, which is very important as well. I will also be making videos about the different types of fabrics, and I'll make videos about the different kinds of knitwear. But for the very first video of this new series, I made the decision that yes, it will be a bit of a broad introductory overview. And there are 4 key things you will need to remember. There are fabrics which are woven and clothes are made from them. There is knitwear which is knitted. Then large knitted fabrics are produced which are cut into pieces and sewn together. This also results in clothing. There is fur and there is leather. These are the oldest types of materials that were used to make the most primitive clothing. That's all for today. I'm saying goodbye to you. All the best to everyone and much success. Goodbye.